Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Edinburgh Business Festival panel discussion on building a sustainable future for Scotland and what's the legacy of COP26. A brief introduction to myself. I'm Bill Fowler. I'm a partner at Dentons, and I'm got the privilege of chairing this session. A brief word about Dentons. We're the world's largest law firm with offices in over 80 countries. And we really are everywhere our clients need us to be as a result of that. However, in an Edinburgh and Scottish context, we're very much a local business. We're celebrating our 150th anniversary in Scotland this year. And we continue to support our local clients, whether that's with their purely local central belt or UK-wide work, whether they're expanding overseas or dealing with inward investment deals or trade issues. And in recent weeks, with the terrible events in Ukraine, we've been supporting our colleagues in Kiev and also clients who are dealing with the very complex issues of international sanctions and supply chain challenges, etc. And that has really brought home for us the benefits of our global reach for very local businesses. So anyway, that's enough about Dentons, and we are, of course, very pleased to be partnering and sponsoring with the Edinburgh Chamber for this event. And I'm also heavily involved with the Chamber I was involved in their COP26 advisory group, and also I'm currently involved in the Just Economic Transition group. So I'm delighted to support the Chamber in these ways, particularly on topics such as COP26 and climate change. So the context for today's session is really the sort of legacy of COP26. You know, it's had mixed reviews as an event, and in terms of whether it was a success or not, and it was described as very much a springboard or an opportunity for Scotland to lead the way in terms of transitioning to a net zero economy. And against that backdrop, clearly we've got the Scottish Government's net zero targets of 2045, and then Edinburgh Council's own target of net zero for the capital by 2030, which in practical terms is yesterday, really. And I'm delighted that we've got Paula McClay from the City of Edinburgh Council to speak to us as well. So the real issue is, with all the pizzazz that went with COP26, how do we keep that momentum going? Because there really are so many different issues competing for people's attention that, you know, and how do we keep that going and progress things? So I'll now briefly introduce each member of our panel, who will then do sort of 8 to 10 minutes each in terms of just their own perspectives on these, and then we'll move into Q&A and hopefully have a very sort of lively discussion. A few words on housekeeping matters. This session is being recorded. If you're participating on Zoom, then you can access the Q&A, and please do use the Q&A to input questions. Don't use the chat, please. It's just what, you know, there are only so many things you can keep an eye on at one point in time. So please use a Q&A for chat. If you are watching the live stream on YouTube, you won't be able to ask questions, I'm afraid. And I think the Chamber will be putting links to the recording available for the members. So without further ado, I'll just introduce the panel. Firstly, we have Paula McClay, who's Head of Policy and Insights at the City of Edinburgh Council. Her full role is City of Edinburgh Council Policy, Community Planning and Insight Functions Head, and she's responsible for the development and delivery of the city's climate strategy, has corporate responsibility for net zero and poverty action plans, among others. Then we will have Nikki Flanders, who's Managing Director of SSE Energy Solutions GB in Ireland. Nikki has 25 years experience in retail in the broadest sense, from bricks and mortar to digital businesses, starting her career with Marks and Spencer's before taking up divisional director and C-suite posts with a wide range of businesses, including WH Smith, Centrica, Telefonica, Drax. And she then joined SSE in 2019 as Managing Director of the Customer Division, providing energy solutions to over 500,000 businesses across Great Britain, from SMEs to large corporates, and over 700,000 homes and businesses across the island of Ireland, so very broad reach. And if her day job didn't sound enough for you, she's also a non-exec director of Pendragon PLC, a leadership fellow at St George's, and a mentor and coach with a focus on diversity and inclusion. Makes me feel quite breathless. Following Nikki, we'll have Dave Gorman, who's Director of Social Responsibility and Sustainability at the University of Edinburgh. Prior to joining the university, he was Head of Strategy at SEPA, and before that worked in local government. In his current role with the university, he's got very wide-ranging remit, including senior leadership responsibility for the university's social responsibility, and sustainability activities, as well as strategic advice and delivery on climate change issues, energy, supply chain, and human rights, responsible investment and social investment. He's a chartered environmentalist, chartered manager, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, the Environmental Association of Universities and Colleges, and the Chartered Management Institute. And then finally, and by no means least, we have Hannah Schlesinger, who's Director of Development with Edinburgh Science. She leads the fundraising, marketing and climate teams across the UK's charitable festival, community and learning projects, and has over 20 years experience in relationship and partnership development across sectors and fundraising across funding streams, including corporate, trust and foundations, major donors and working in that direction towards innovation and business development in climate change, and working with both the UK and Scottish governments, engaging at a ministerial level with policymakers, as well as working across the cultural sector and in large scale events. So with those brief words of introduction, I'll hand over to Paula to kick us off, please. Paula, the floor is yours.
Hi, I've just managed to throw my phone that I'm phoning in. So I'm back now, thank you, just in time. So thanks for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation with the room, and I was asked to give a bit of an overview of the city climate strategy and how we're delivering and planning to deliver on it. To talk a little bit about what COP meant for Edinburgh and what I think its future legacy will be, and to say a little bit about the opportunities that presents for Edinburgh in 7 minutes. So I'll do my best. I suppose the first thing to say is yes, City of Edinburgh Council set a city target to be net zero by 2030, but I think alongside that, the council recognised that in order for the city to transition in that way, which is needed, to respond to the climate emergency, it's not something the council will deliver alone, and that it will be down to every citizen, public body partners, private sector partners, and all layers of government to really work together to coordinate and accelerate the type of activity we need to see in this city. And that's why when I talk about the climate strategy, it's more about the council holding the pen for the city. And we undertook over 12 months of engagement and development on the strategy. And I would hasten to add that while we've been writing what is and amounts to a route map, really, a journey that we're going to undertake as a city to get to 2030, work and activity is always ongoing. And the key is really to find a way to bring that all together so that we're able to show it is greater than the sum of its parts, and it will take us where we need to go in order to be net zero. So the strategy itself is quite a large document. We'll share all the links. Hopefully you'll have seen it. I'm unapologetic in a way how large it is. It's an 80-page document, but I think when you look at all the things that you need to do in order to get to net zero, it requires that depth and breadth, which is incredibly challenging to convey and to message, but takes a thematic approach, does break down the type of activities we need to go by heat, by growth and development in the city, by buildings and land, looking at transport, looking at just economic transition, about adaptation, and again, how you fund that transition across the piece, as well as citizen consent and behaviour change, which are core fundamental principles for how you would deliver the scale of action we need to undertake. And across those thematic areas, we are really clear that while you have to take a thematic approach in order to eat the elephant, the real challenge is in doing everything all at once at street, neighbourhood and city level, and taking quite a strategic approach to delivering the net zero transition. Within that, I think the strategy, we've provided an executive summary, which, yes, you need to look at the whole picture and the whole system, but also there are some priority areas for action. And within that, we look at heat and energy, we look at decarbonisation of our public transport, as well as transport in general. We look at the decarbonisation of public buildings, as well as energy efficiency in public buildings in the round, and how we can support businesses to transition, as well as to maximise the opportunities that will be presented by the large-scale infrastructure change we need to see to deliver a net zero agenda. Across all of that, you know, as I've said, it's a journey, it lays a route map, but we are clearly in a delivery phase. It is, as was said, 2030 is almost tomorrow in planning terms. So we've established a series of partnerships across the city, where I'm really pleased to say that our partners in the city are stepping up, not just to play their individual roles, but to take that collective leadership and corporate role, including the Chamber, to convene the right types of partnerships to bring together expertise, collective planning, mapping, project and pipeline development, and to map that to our objectives to net zero transition. Across all of that, the Council is leading on the Infrastructure Investment Programme Board, which holds that together and really has the single objective of developing a green infrastructure investment plan for the City of Edinburgh, which, you know, done successfully, will probably be the largest scale infrastructure investment planning that will have happened in this city at one point in time since World War II. So, you know, the scale of this cannot be underestimated. And, you know, we are making steps and progress on delivering that. What COP26 did, I think, is really bring to the fore and give far greater coverage and focus to the fact that climate action is not something any of us, whether it's citizens, businesses or public bodies, are now doing on the side of our desks or as an addition. It is core to all of our objectives and delivering on a better Edinburgh, a better business, a better council. And in bringing that kind of momentum, it gave us an opportunity to really share what we're doing. The work and the partnership that City of Edinburgh Council did with the Chamber around COP was to bring out that and to be able to say that, you know, we're not at the start of a journey. We are already in train. A lot of us are doing innovative things, private sector at the forefront of some of that innovation. And we need to recognise that, and we need to recognise the skills and opportunity that exist in Edinburgh to really drive this agenda forward and be Scotland leading, UK leading, European leading, and global leading in the transition to net zero. And I think for me, the opportunities that are there were really clear. It's that as we kind of face into return from a pandemic, the true impacts of Brexit and the ramifications of the situation in Ukraine and Russia, there will be no economic recovery, and there will, without it being a green recovery. And that the green recovery and climate action isn't just a challenge and a moral obligation. It is actually where the greatest opportunity for sustainable growth, good growth, and progress in the city towards our city vision actually exists. So opportunities for business development, opportunities for supply chain, opportunity for jobs and job creation, and actually all contributing to Edinburgh being a better, more sustainable place where we also play our part in tackling the climate emergency that's affecting the planet. So the key now will be maintaining that momentum, maintaining that energy and priority that's been given to climate action so far. And I hope that in part, some of the infrastructure we're setting up across the city to bring the best and most committed minds together to really lean into this challenge and deliver the route map we've set in the climate strategy will happen. So that's my kind of overview, optimism and introduction. And I'm happy to answer any questions about any part of the strategy or the City Council's activity in this space.
Paula, that's a fantastic introduction and overview of the city's plan and strategy. So thank you for that. I suppose for me, one of the key things to bring out of what you said, and we can hopefully expand on this in the discussion aspect, is that keeping this climate change and sustainability journey at the forefront of people's minds when there are so many other pressures impacting on people. Once the noise and the razzmatazz of the associated COP26 is gone, how do you keep these things at people's forefront of mind when they're worrying about the price of gas, the price of electricity, they're worrying about, is there going to be further escalation of what's going on in Ukraine and how does that impact? And, it's a really tough ask. And then on top of that, you've got to take people with you in terms of what you touched on, the behavioural change and taking people with you. And there is a lot of behaviour change required, whether that's the type, how we just get about the city, how we use our energy in our homes, and how, for example, how's the low emission zone going to impact people on a day-to-day basis, and how do you get people to stay on that journey with you and say that's a good thing that we're doing? And that hearts and minds piece is, I think, a big challenge. So just some observations and that jumps out at me. And the collaboration piece, of course, I think is key, and no doubt Nikki, the other panelists, particularly Nikki, I suspect will come in on that theme. So on that note, I'll hand over to you, Nikki.
Great. Well, look, thank you. And hello, everyone. It's great to join in this conversation today. As Bill said, I'm Managing Director for the Customer Divisions in the SSE Group. And you'll know us as SSE Energy Solutions in GB, and perhaps some of you might know us as SSE Electricity over in Ireland. So across Ireland and GB, we serve just over 1.3 million customers, ranging from domestic in Ireland only to large businesses. So perhaps just a wee bit about SSE Group. So our vision is to be a leading energy company in a net zero world, but it is more than just words on the page. So, the SSE Group has committed to invest £12.5 billion by 2026 in low carbon infrastructure. So that's about £7 million a day. And our teams are running huge projects. So, as we're speaking, our teams are currently building in SSE more offshore wind than anyone in the world, including the world's largest offshore wind farm at Dogger Bank. And the investment here is going to enable the delivery of over a quarter of the UK's 40 gigawatt offshore wind target by 2030. Now, I think this is quite a fun fact, so hopefully you do too, because sometimes we can get all a bit bogged down in stats, but a single turn of one blade of the Dogger Bank turbine actually powers a home for 2 days. That's in one turn. As all of you, I'm sure, will know, that SSE clearly has very strong roots in Scotland in terms of generation development and also employment. Some of you may be familiar with our Beatrice offshore wind farm, which is northeast off of the Caithness coast, and that's delivered nearly £500 million worth of benefit into the Scottish economy during development and construction. And it will deliver over £1 billion worth of economic value over its lifetime. And we've got more developments planned as well, like Seagreen, which is off of the east coast of Scotland, which is currently supporting around about 500 jobs in Scotland. So lots of development ambitions, as I say, with very sort of firm financial commitment. But we also have plans to invest in flexible and long-term duration storage capacity, such as hydro, carbon capture, and hydrogen. And for me, I think an area that sometimes gets a wee bit overlooked is actually our network systems. So in order for this new world of energy to work, we need to upgrade our UK network systems. And so the investment that SSE is putting forward provides roughly 20% of the funding that's needed across the UK in order to develop the network systems. And our goal is that the connection of 20 gigawatts of renewable generation and the facilitation of around about 2 million electric vehicles and 1 million heat pumps will actually be on the SSE electricity networks by 2030 through this investment. I'm sure, like many of the companies on the call today, we've got very specific targets in terms of scientific targets that underpin our company's net zero ambitions. And we have a clear target for an 80% carbon intensity reduction by 2030 across all of the group. So that's all pretty technical. But as well as new technologies, a big part of the journey is about developing new skills and creating green jobs for the future. And looking over the next few years, SSE is looking to create around 1,000 jobs a year, which are all very firmly aligned to the net zero transition. And so coming back to my job role in terms of energy customer solutions, our job is actually to be that shop front for the SSE group in terms of the green generation and the more broader generation portfolio and low carbon solutions, with the primary aim that we're working with our customers to support them on their net zero journey. And as Bill said, very much in the collaborative role. Paula called out some super examples in terms of what the City of Edinburgh are doing. And there's loads of innovation going on there. What we do tend to find, particularly our SME customers, so our business customers running small and medium enterprises, that they say it can be pretty daunting to know where to start. And this is a massive oversimplification, but I tend to think of energy consumption in 3 categories. So first of all, understand how your company is actually consuming today and how you can make it more efficient. And so at SSE, we offer things like energy audits, identify opportunities, and free energy management tools. And for larger businesses, there's a range of applications that we and others offer. So things like building energy management, and Paula referenced some of the infrastructural changes going on in the City of Edinburgh. And these types of tools are really quite fundamental to be able to measure the outputs of what you're hoping to get. But whatever your size of business, smart meters really are the key. And I completely understand for many business owners, particularly having gone through 2 years of very challenging times with COVID, the thought of having to power down your business in order to put in a smart meter is actually putting a lot of people off. But smart meters really are the portal to that smarter use of energy. And there is no additional cost, and actually there's minimal disruption for a business. So the installation tends to be less than an hour, and the downtime in terms of not having a power supply is around about 15 to 20 minutes. And so this is something we're really keen to discuss with our customers, because I think that sometimes the perception can be quite different. So once you sort of understand what it is you're using and how you can be more efficient, then the next step is to make sure that whatever energy you're using, you make it green. And so at SSE, one of the things that we do for any of our customers who sign up to one of our contracts is that they will automatically receive 100% renewable electricity from our UK wind and hydro assets. And there's clearly independent verification around that as well. And obviously there's options like green gas if you're a gas heavy industry, in terms of being able to demonstrate you're cutting your carbon emissions. And for some companies who want to take perhaps a slightly longer view on their energy strategy, you may have heard the phrase CPPAs, and that stands for Corporate Power Purchase Agreement. And again, historically, these have been shrouded in loads of complicated terms. So at SSE, I think, we've actually gone quite some way to debunk a lot of these terms. We've made it very simple and very flexible so that customers of all sizes could actually sign up to a longer term contract, say like 2 years, 5 years, and maybe some 10 years, but mainly 2 to 5. That actually has power from a specific asset in terms of actually having that corporate power purchase agreement. And so once you've then sort of looked at what you're using and how you can be more efficient and then how you can green it up, that third step is really about reducing your carbon footprint. And there's lots of stuff out there. We had Paula mention some of the technologies and ways that people are looking at that from a city perspective and also from a business perspective. So solar installs, battery storage, on-site generation are just some of the ways. And I think, sometimes speaking to our customers, what can be quite hard to navigate and what some people aren't aware of is that there are grant options that businesses can access from local enterprise partnerships. People like the Carbon Trust and commercial banks also do specific green products. And so we see our role in just making sure that we're able to point customers to various resources. So the theme of this webinar is obviously COP26, and Bill asked the question, did it have the desired benefit? I think I was very lucky to spend a substantial amount of time at COP. I was there for most of the days, and I think potentially that there were some quarters that actually went into COP with slightly unrealistic expectations. To think that we could solve such a majorly complex issue in a week would not have been realistic. Did it get to the 1.5%? Well, we know that there's various views as to actually where it landed, and we know that we fell short of that. But that said, it absolutely galvanized. It connected businesses to policymakers. It connected businesses to each other. And just a couple of examples, that post-COP, we at SSE hosted various sort of delegates from Denmark and from the States, and we took them around our wind farms and our sort of assets to actually share best practices in terms of what we were doing. So I think clearly the events of the last few months, and again, Bill, you mentioned it in your intro, in terms of rising wholesale gas prices, has brought very firmly into the frame that we need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And it makes economic sense too, because not only is the cost of developing renewable generation reducing, renewables actually pay money back to the consumers when the wholesale prices are high. And one illustration I'd like to give on this point is, had it been operational today, our wind farm in Dogger Bank, which is in development, would have paid back over 1.6 billion to consumers this winter, which would be around about a £67 reduction off of every household in the country's bill. So in summary, the challenge is clearly significant, but there are many companies and councils and government bodies out there, just like we are in SSE, who have the know-how and are getting on with doing the job. We're doing that in our way in terms of developing renewable generation and working with customers to share what we have to support them on their own journeys. And that's what I think it's about, really. The final sort of point of it is that we're only going to get there if we all work together, collaborate, and pool our diversity of thought. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much, Nikki. I mean, some fascinating stats. I particularly like the single turn of the turbine blade stat. I think a couple of themes for me that jumped out was, again, the collaboration piece and big business working with smaller businesses to help them progress along the journey. And I think that's absolutely key, because it is daunting for smaller businesses. And the other piece was the skills piece. And this is such a long-term journey we're on, some very short-term pressing needs, clearly, but it's long-term if you're looking to 2045 and beyond. And part of this is, and maybe Dave will perhaps touch on some of this, is from the academic side, is how we make sure that our people coming through school and university now have the right skills to go on this journey in the future. Because, for example, we're doing a lot of work in some early stage hydrogen projects at the moment, and that's a lot of people. I mean, hydrogen's not a new thing, it's used in industry all the time, but using it for what we're planning to do and transporting it at bulk in the way we're planning to do it, and to manufacture it in the scale that we're looking at doing it, requires a whole new set of skills and more people trained with those skills. And how do we bring those people through at the same time as the timetable for the energy transition is operating? I think that's going to be key. And the other thing is, you mentioned smart meters. I mean, they've had a lot of bad press in the past. There's been lots of noise about them over the last 10 years, and smart meter rollouts and schemes, big government schemes that have just fallen flat, frankly. And how do we overcome the public view of those things as potentially a failure, or they don't work, or whatever the sort of mindset is about them, so that they actually do get taken up now and do facilitate that more efficient use of energy and reduction of carbon footprints as a result. So just a few observations on that. So thank you, Nikki. And Nikki, just so you're aware, there is a question for you in the Q&A that you might want to think about ahead of the Q&A session. Dave, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everybody. Great pleasure to join you. My name is Dave Gorman. As Bill said, I'm Director for Social Responsibility and Sustainability at the university, and that means helping the university understand and try and focus our response on things like the climate crisis we're discussing today, the nature crisis, how we do what we can on human rights issues, engaging with the local community, and our investments where we want to be a responsible investor. I thought I'd touch very briefly on the size of the university. We're one of the largest employers in Edinburgh with 12,000 staff. We've got about 45,000 students from, I think, about 160 countries. So we're a very international university. We've got 600 buildings with about 10 million square feet of property, and we're larger. Universities are larger these days than people realize, I think. So our turnover is about 1.2 billion, and we've got about $1 billion of assets under management. And what we try and do is use all of that size and scale and reputation. We're a world top 20 university to take a whole institution approach to these kind of issues. So we have a net zero target to be net zero by 2040, so slightly later than the city. The reason for that is because we've included aviation amongst our challenge, so that's quite a difficult challenge for us. But we do work really closely with Paula and the rest of the city. And some of my colleagues are chairing some of the groups that are now trying to translate the need to meet the city target into reality. So like Nikki, I was fortunate to be at COP26, a really interesting experience. I was there in week 2, so I didn't get to say hello to Barack Obama, but I did wave at some other famous people from a distance. I was in what's called the blue zone, so there's often 2 zones at these kind of events. There's the green zone for the public and everybody to engage, and there's a blue zone where you don't get in unless you've got a pass. And we were well represented. There was something like 50 University of Edinburgh staff and students there. And I attended dozens of events while I was there. It's a real blizzard, of stuff. And I decided that I would try and tweet about all the major announcements that were happening. And so to give you some sense of the scale of these events, I said there's 50,000 people there probably. I tweeted probably 400 times about things that I saw happening over the 2 weeks. So I would agree with Nikki that there's a headline issue and then there's a kind of lot going on underneath it. So what I thought I'd do the time I've got is say a little bit about my view of COP success or failure, a little bit about skills, as you might expect, and prompted by Bill, based on the fact we're a university, and then a little bit about collaboration. So on the success piece, well, let's take it from an absolute point of view and think about the science for a second. The numbers are coming out for last year, and last year was probably a record year for the use of coal. So that's not a good thing to start with. The IPCC, which issues reports about climate change, its working group 2 issued a report about the impacts of climate change, and it's just as scary. In fact, it's scarier than it's ever been. If we do not take action in this decade, we will start to see the cascading failures, as they call it, where one domino leads to another domino, and we get feedback effects that we really don't want. And I always like to use the example of, if we had a global crisis in the finance sector, which crashed the financial system just about because too many people were sold houses they couldn't afford in some parts of America. If that triggered a global crisis, what will happen when 1 billion people go, in places that are going underwater, for example? So we know that we've got to deal with these issues. In terms of the emissions and the gap between where we are and where we need to be, the world emits something like 50,000 million tons a year of carbon dioxide equivalent. So 50,000 million tons. By the end of this decade, we need to get to something like half that. We need to be at 25,000. So we're at 50,000, we need to be at 25,000. COP got us to, on current estimates, something like 40,000. So some way between where we need to be and where we are. So you could say in one sense, well, that's all pretty gloomy. It was a failure then. At the same time, again, as Nikki was pointing out, billions and billions of dollars were committed at COP to all kinds of, dozens and dozens of announcements. You've got real path-breaking innovation being announced at that conference. You've got accelerators being announced where people are, pouring in with venture capital money, or people are promising that they will buy the outcomes of these innovative products that are coming. You had announcements about forests, you had announcements about cutting methane, you had announcements about aviation and green shipping. You had announcements about steel and concrete. People who've been tracking, say, the steel industry have been astonished by the changes and the speed of the changes that the steel industry is making. And we've probably moved from a scenario where, in Paris, when that was agreed in 2015, we were heading for 3 to 4 degrees. That is genuinely catastrophic territory where you're talking about the breakdown of society. So not a good place to be. The estimates I saw after COP were, if everybody keeps their promises, which is a big if, we're probably heading for more like 1.8 to 2 degrees. So disastrous, but not catastrophic. So I suppose it depends on your point of view, doesn't it? It's good news is it's not catastrophic, it's only disastrous. I think what I really mean behind that is we've moved very quickly. So the amount of renewables since 2015 is something like doubled in terms of deployment. And if we can keep deploying renewables at the speed we're deploying, we have a great chance of meeting this 1.5 degree limit. So that's my view of it. It's kind of relative and absolute. From an absolute point of view, we're miles away from where we need to be, but from a relative point of view, we're speeding up and we're now in a race. So let me just touch on skills for a second. Obviously, we're a university. There's sometimes a call that we, as universities like ours, should blacklist companies that are not doing their bit. So we shouldn't engage with oil and gas, for example, is a call at the minute from some students. We wouldn't agree with that. We can see anyway that young people coming through are demanding that universities provide them with the skills that they need, that universities take the sort of action that we're trying to take as a university to manage our own emissions. What we're starting to see very clearly is a move away from people who are studying geology in order to get more oil out of the ground. And we're seeing huge demand for courses on renewables, on batteries, on storage, on energy systems, on ecology, sustainable construction, the bioeconomy. We're seeing huge demand for courses on environmental law and climate law, on finance and banking, on business. We built it into our MBA. So we're just seeing it everywhere. Everybody's now aware. And of course, it's not just us. You'll also see this from the further education colleges, because again, I think it was Nikki that said that, we're going to need people with the skills at a practical level as well. We need more apprenticeships. We need more professional services. So we're definitely seeing that young people are voting with their wallets, really, in terms of the courses that they're demanding. And just to finish up, I just want to touch on this kind of public-private point. I mean, it's obvious this is a once in a, I don't know, 200-year, 500-year change that we're trying to make, and we're trying to do really fast. So obviously we need to collaborate. It's a huge, all aspects of society need to change. I think it was Keith Anderson said, we all need to do more. We need to do it now. We need to do it faster, and then we need to do more again. So obviously we need to collaborate. If you just take one example, we're not doing so well in the UK on buildings and how we green our buildings. So who are we going to need to collaborate in order to get our buildings where they need to be? Well, first of all, the policy needs to be right. It's getting there, but it's not strong enough yet. Then we need the regulatory side at local level. We need building standards, and we need the planners to make sure that they're providing the right incentives and regulating where necessary. We then need the construction industry to do their bit. So we need architects to be understanding what a green building looks like. We need the builders to actually build the buildings. We need the mechanical and electrical engineers to understand their piece, and the HVAC people, and we need the verifiers to make sure the buildings are built properly. And we need also the banks and the mortgage providers to value houses that are lower running costs. They're more valuable houses than the houses that are inefficient and cost you a fortune. You can see that now. If we'd stayed the course in the 2010s and actually designed some of the buildings as planned, people would have been saving, I think again, Nikki said, thousands and thousands of pounds, billions of pounds to the economy could have been saved if we had buildings that were less drafty than the ones that we've been putting up. So I think we need, and of course the skills piece as well, we'll be trying to do our bit to provide the skills that are needed with the people coming through, and so will the further education colleges. So even in one small area of buildings, we need a huge collaborative effort from all parts of the system. I'm very confident that business can respond to this, but as someone said, this is not the only challenge on the table at the minute. So we need to stay the course, and we absolutely need leadership, and we absolutely need government to provide the right signals. I think once business gets the right signals, we're going to fly. Maybe that's a bad analogy for a climate discussion, but we really have opportunities here, but we haven't got much time, so we need to make sure all the pieces are lined up. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Dave. The whistle stop tour there as well. I think the skills piece is really interesting, alongside buildings. And one of the things we touched on in one of our preparatory discussions was how the climate change aspect and sustainability is front and foremost, but we've got particularly in an Edinburgh context, we've got a really gnarly issue of how we deal with our building stock, which is all largely, particularly within the city boundary, old, and some very old, and really difficult to improve and quite expensive to improve. And how do you fund that, and how do you get the homeowners or the landlords to actually fund that? And we've had things like the Green Deal, which have been and gone in the past, that really didn't have the impact that they were meant to have, and actually probably tainted public views on things. So, and again, that's where the leadership piece that you mentioned comes in as well, in terms of driving things. So, finally, we have Hannah Schlesinger, and that will then round up our speaker presentations, and we can move into the Q&A. So just a quick reminder, be thinking of your questions. We've already got a few questions coming in our Q&A for us to think about, and we'll come to those. So thinking caps on in the audience, please, and please do send your questions in. So Hannah, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks very much for asking me to take part in today. As Bill mentioned, I've been involved in partnership building for many years. And as my colleagues on this panel have mentioned, I believe very, very strongly that collaboration and innovation are going to be key moving forward, and that we're going to be unable to do everything that we need to do without winning over hearts and minds as well, and generating really positive behaviour change amongst the public. At Edinburgh Science, we're doing as much as we can in these spaces. Edinburgh Science was set up in 1989 to deliver the world's first and still one of the world's largest science festivals. 2 years later, we set up Generation Science, which is a touring primary school education programme that visits schools in every local authority in a normal year in Scotland. And that's up to 55,000 school pupils. At the moment, with COVID, we've been delivering in a slightly different way, sending boxes full of cool kit to schools and delivering this remotely. So we are continuing with this project. We have a commercial arm of our charity with all surplus reinvested into our foundation. And through that arm, we deliver various projects globally, including the Abu Dhabi Science Festival. We delivered events in the Sustainability Forum at Expo Dubai. We created some content for SSE actually at COP26 as well. We also have another event around careers, which I think links very nicely into the skills for a just transition, which I can talk a bit about later if it comes up. But our Careers Hive event encourages young people to continue with their STEM or their science, technology, engineering, and maths education, and that we do that through sharing the wide variety of jobs that might be available to them if they do continue with those subjects as they move through school. Our science festival's got a really wide variety of events for everyone. So we have family events that many of you will have experienced with your families, and we also have a whole load of activity for adults as well that people may well have attended. Our most prestigious event is the Edinburgh Medal, which is awarded every year to a person of science who's done something really amazing. So this has been in the past James Lovelock and also David Attenborough. And in 2019, we welcomed Christiana Figueres to receive this award. And the inimitable Martin Valenti, who many of you will have met, had just joined our board at the time, and he encouraged us to make the most of this opportunity. So we invited senior leaders to a small and exclusive roundtable event. So we had individuals there from really wide variety of sectors and organisations. So EDF, we had WWF and the University of Edinburgh, SEPA, really wide variety of organisations to talk together in a collaborative way. And as Martin had suggested, it was an incredible experience. We found new ideas coming out, new collaborations coming out, and Christiana at the end of the meeting said, I'm coming back in 2 months' time. I want to hear how all these ideas have developed. And so 2 months later, we brought the group, now much bigger, together to present to Christiana lots of different ideas and innovations. We also had Rosanna Cunningham, who was then the Cabinet Secretary for Climate and Environment. And a lot of these innovations and ideas went on to be developed in different ways and have progressed. Our events have continued. We've continued doing this because what we found was, whilst we're a charity, we don't have the finance or the resource to deliver a lot of these ideas. What we do have is a convening power, and also people do trust us with the science as well. We call this the Climate Opportunity Ideas Factory, and continue with this. We've had a few really big plenary sessions in this area. So we've brought other ministers, Chris Stark, together with these groups. But we also run smaller, more focused, sector-focused meetings and events, such as on heat decarbonisation, skills for a just transition. We've had one on green finance and land use, for example. One idea that emerged from one of the earlier roundtables came from Bailey Gifford, who, like SSE have mentioned, Nikki at SSE has mentioned, found that SMEs that they were working with were really struggling to focus on their net zero journey. They have so many other things to do. They found it really difficult to figure out how to do it. And they asked us to create something to help them, to support them. The idea initially was a pledge, but I think we all know there are a lot of pledges out there, and you know, how effective are they sometimes, because is it just a badge, and how are they monitored? What we found was that what we could do was look at the science and bring together the things that we felt were really important, different tools, different resources, different organizations that support this journey. And we've put them all in one place, and we call that the Net Zero Toolkit. It's completely free to use. It was launched last June, and we've got around 350 users at the moment, always open to hearing from new partners for this. And if any of our listeners here are keen to get started on their net zero journey, please just have a look at it and let us know if we can do any more to support. We've started having some events bringing together SMEs to talk about challenges and hear from others as well, to help them on that journey. So I guess the other thing to think about, the other thing I was going to say about the Net Zero Toolkit is we did think it was just for SMEs, but actually what we found is much larger companies really need to encourage their suppliers to make these changes and help their suppliers to make these changes if they want to be truly net zero. And so we have found more and more companies helping us to promote this tool to the businesses that they're working with every day as well. As a science festival or a public engagement organisation, we're in quite a unique position. And we're trusted for our science, and we engage the public through a means that we call often internally science by stealth. So people go out and enjoy some cool activities and maybe don't realise how much they're learning at the time. And we do include quite a lot of content that relates to climate. We've become more and more passionate about that over the years. We have always programmed for the planet, but more and more this is feeding across all of our different work streams. So our educational programs, our community engagement, and also our science festival. So this year in our science festival, which I can let you all know is launching next week and will be taking place from the 9th to the 24th of April across Edinburgh venues. We're going to have a free to access exhibition on the Mound called Consumed, which is all about our consumption, small changes that we can make to make a positive impact on the climate. This is one of the ways that we engage with communities, is putting free activities in places that people might stumble upon and then can learn from while they're there. We also have in our adult program events, panel events and discussions on circular cities, for example. But we also have our sociable science events. This is where our science by stealth really comes in. Climate cocktails, for example. You can join a trail across the city called Toast to Gaia, visiting different bars around the city who've created net zero cocktails and can tell you all about the different ingredients that they're using. And also a number of other events that are going on across the festival as well. So I guess now what we're doing is trying to integrate this more and more through our projects. We're creating a new workshop for our schools program all about the climate. And I think COP definitely pushed us harder, but it also really helped us create new connections and work with new organizations and helped us actually to bring people together, because people and different companies and different organizations across Scotland were so desperate to work with others and see if they could find ways to make a positive impact. So yes, I think that's everything I was going to say. Thanks very much, Bill.
Thank you very much, Hannah. That's wonderful. And I think, again, one of the things that jumped out at me there was the collaboration and building sort of lines of communication, if you will, between different parts of the business community, and not just business, but the whole sort of Edinburgh community. I think that for me, one of the things in that is not just keeping it within a sort of almost rarefied strata of the business community or the public, like you and I in our normal lives, and actually cascading those efforts out to everyone so that everybody's on the journey. Because going back to one of Paula's opening comments, where she was talking about how this is something that needs everyone in all sectors and all walks of life to be engaged in, and we're all on the same bus here, and hopefully going to the same destination. So, just making sure that we're not too restrictive in who's participating in events. And that's one of the things I think is great about this forum, is it's an opportunity to speak to everybody. And rather than just, in my context, my sort of business clients, it's a much broader opportunity. So that's the end of our the sort of introductory comments from our panel session. So we'll now move into some Q&A, and I'm keeping an eye. There's various questions now coming in on the Q&A. So thank you for that. I'll maybe, if Paula, there's one question which I think probably is a nice one to kick us off with, which I think you're probably best to have the initial go at, which is, and what do you think the biggest opportunity for Edinburgh is as a net zero city? And we'll start on the positive, hopefully a positive note, Paula.
So thank you. I think the biggest opportunity for Edinburgh is actually, the size, shape, compactness, but also completeness of the city in the sense of the number of industries we've got, the opportunity to test and trial and be at the front in an urban setting, at the front of the type of changes we need to see. Be that in our building stock, we've got a historic, as you said, a historic city with old stock. We're not the most unique. Other places have these challenges, but I think Edinburgh's size, the fact we've got the university with us, the type of skills and businesses we have on our doorstep, we have a critical mass of the right types of people, the right problems, the right skills, the right enthusiasm, energy, and really to lead. And I think we don't always maximize on that, as we always focus in Edinburgh on the things we haven't done and the things that we still have left to do. But actually we've got a great opportunity here to, as I say, be at the forefront and see that as an opportunity then to outsource, present to others those opportunities and drive our economy to other parts of Scotland, to other parts of the UK by virtue of having led that innovation in the city centre. And I think, I don't think we always sell that or maximise on that potential as much as we could. And it is, urban cities that have that real opportunity, whereas other parts of both Scotland and the rest of the UK don't.
Yeah, I think another area for me, sort of opportunity outside the sort of the business side of it would be, I think, the sort of general landscape and environment that we all live in, and how we improve that in terms of use of green space, changing travel behaviours, creating a much more open and pleasant environment for people just to be in and about, much healthier.
I think the compactness of the city and the geography we have really do offer us some opportunities, as you say, around connectivity, around green space, around land use, that perhaps other places don't. And I think it is really recognising those opportunities and selling them more, both to funders as part of our collaboration and to the Scottish Government. And I think with that we could really be, as Dave said, motoring. The only other area I would really highlight is, if you think of the journeys we need to go on, Edinburgh is perhaps at the starting blocks of its energy journeys in terms of energy generation and distribution. And yes, that means we've got a long way to go, but it also means there's a lot of untapped opportunity and potential in that particular area of work that I do think is offers significant economic growth and general benefit, both to a just transition and to the wider city.
Dave, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah. I do indeed, Bill. I just want to caveat what I'm about to say, otherwise it will sound glib. I do recognise that we're in a cost of living crisis for many, in fact, large numbers of households and also large numbers of businesses. And the transition that we're talking about is going to be difficult. It's very difficult to execute smooth transitions, isn't it? It's why policy can be so hard. So that's the caveat, in terms of delivering this. But if we can deliver it, I think there's just enormous possibility. I think there's huge possibilities to reduce the costs of energy over time and the costs of waste and so on in a green economy. And I say that because we're in the baby days of renewables, really. You know, the costs of solar panels since they were invented in the 1970s are down 99%. The costs of wind are down 80%. You know, if you look at the costs of offshore wind, you know, they were coming in at what, £150 a megawatt hour not so long ago, and now people are bidding at 40 and below sometimes. Storage costs are massively down 70, 80%. And this is the earliest days of this sort of stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, things are coming forward now with prices that nobody anticipated. Say steel. Everybody thought because steel is a very capital intensive industry, it would be decades before we saw green steel. And now we're seeing major steel makers saying, you know, it might be entirely green steel by 2035. So I think, first of all, the opportunity to harness savings. And that will bring entirely new industries and jobs, and high quality jobs as well. You know, so people will be starting to apply data and real-time data alongside smart systems and smart products and so on. I think this whole series of areas there about optimizing the use of energy and systems that we barely touched on. The other one I would say this because I use the work at SEPA, there's these huge co-benefits from tackling climate change. So to just pick on one, and what I mean by co-benefit is multiple objectives. When I deliver against one thing, I also get other benefits. So not many people know. If I said to you, you know, if I ask you how many people die from poor air quality in the UK, and compare that to the number of people dying in road traffic accidents, I don't know what you'd think, but it's roughly 5 to 10 times as many people die from poor air quality as they do in road traffic accidents. And many more lives are affected. You've got poor air quality inhibits neurological development, it exacerbates childhood asthma, it brings on strokes and heart attacks, it damages buildings, it destroys crops. When you start to tackle climate change by eliminating fossil fuels, by moving to electric vehicles, I mean, we don't only want to rely on electric vehicles, we want to also rely on public transport, but just let's imagine that we just move to electric vehicles. You get these huge co-benefits in terms of air quality, billions and billions of pounds worth of co-benefit. So for me, just to sum up, you'll have savings, I think, in the long run. We'll be able to find better ways to do it. It's already much cheaper to use renewables than to use gas to generate electricity. That's just the fact of the matter. We'll get great new jobs coming, I think, and we'll also get these co-benefits. So I'm really optimistic, but there's a transition difficulty, as I started with, you know, that we've got to get right. If we mess that bit up, you know, that's going to be difficult.
Thank you, Dave. Does Hannah, Nikki, do either of you want to come in on this question, or shall I move on to one of the other questions that are coming in? Nikki, you've come off mute.
I was going to say there's loads of great questions here, so I'll let you move on because there's quite a few themes. I think we can link some of the questions together. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. Do you want to take the first question that came in, Nikki, or?
I mean, look. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to probably send something on as well, but in super quick summary, renewable gas is produced from sources like agricultural materials, and it goes through a process of anaerobic digestion. And what that does is it basically breaks down the carbon dioxide and it removes it. Now, the challenge with green gas is that there isn't very much of it, and therefore that's reflected in the price. So what we've done at SSE is we've created a proposition, which the details are on our website, which basically blends pure sort of 25% certified renewable gas with a 75% carbon neutral gas back off, and that's all explained on our website. But the scientific answer would be it's extracted through anaerobic digestion, so there is such a thing as green gas.
Yeah, thank you. Because it is intuitively quite confusing and a sort of,
yes.
What's that? So thank you. So one of the linked questions I think that came in, and Hannah, you might want to come in on this one to start with, was the question about having discussed the benefits of a net zero city, but one of the linked questions is, how do we move to net zero in a way that's just and we don't leave groups behind? And I think that's one of the things you touched on in your session, and everybody will have an input into that, because a just economic transition is obviously key.
Yes, so we've run a couple of roundtables on similar topics. Just Transition and Skills for a Just Transition looked at how we can encourage everyone to think about changes in careers and making their changes in a way that isn't going to be disruptive as much as possible. I mean, we know that there are people who have jobs that are going to change, but a lot of it is all links back to firstly collaboration. I hate to keep saying the same thing, but we have to be collaborating with groups everywhere. And we talked a lot about finding key people within communities, all sorts of communities across the city, the country, and working with them in the way that they want to be worked with in order to affect public behaviour change. We're having a roundtable event on the 27th of April. If anyone's interested, please get in touch, which is going to be looking at public behaviour change. And we're really interested in how do you make the decisions that need to be made? How do you make people make those decisions without forcing them? So how do you encourage people to decarbonize? How do you make these decisions as sexy as the choice to get a Tesla, and also as a more affordable, because everyone would love to have an electric vehicle, but they're not very cheap and they're not easy to get. So we've been doing a lot of work around this I think for us the way that we can do that is around the public engagement through the festival, through sharing as many messages as possible with different community groups, but also through working with all of these different groups within our roundtables and trying to work out how to encourage the groups that aren't already engaged with us to be engaged.
Thank you. I mean, I suppose another aspect to this is actually not leaving, people whose jobs have depended on fossil fuel production and supply or use in one shape or form, and making sure that they can transition to the new opportunities. And that's where there's a lot of work going on, I know, in around hydrogen and how we can transition people from the oil and gas sector using the same skills into hydrogen production, manufacture and export. And we've currently, as of last week, the Green Freeports bidding process kicked off in Scotland, and we've probably got 9 or 10 different ports and areas competing to be one of 2 green free ports in Scotland. And probably the lead objective around green free ports is job creation and regeneration, creating new green jobs rather than and facilitating that transition from fossil fuels. So there's a lot of activity in that space, but it's really how we actually do it in practice on a day-to-day and sort of community and individual level, and it is undoubtedly going to be a challenge. Does anybody else Paula, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think for us, it's issues like, if we're going to have EV infrastructure in the city, does the market just step in and put it in places where, and I'm paraphrasing here, where richer members of our community can buy EV cars and want that infrastructure in the local vicinity? And what does that then mean for connecting the whole city and offering those ongoing opportunities to the city at large? Now, obviously, there's a debate about the extent to which you want cars versus public transport and active travel in the city. But putting that aside for the moment, the question we do need to resolve is the partnership between private and public investment and interests and endeavours in the city, so that when the market responds, it responds in a way that also contributes to the well-being of the city as a whole. And we share in the risk and we share in the rewards that exist in investing in infrastructure like EV in the city. And, I think there's a really positive opportunity to enter into that type of partnership, where I know businesses want to contribute as well as benefit from the opportunities presented by the transition to net zero. And that's an example of where we need to get into that discussion. So what's the shared risk? What's the shared reward? And how do we ensure that we're not simply providing for one portion of a society to benefit, but for Edinburgh as a whole.
Thank you.
Can I add just 3 practical things that we've done, Bill, in terms of the point around just transition that's been mentioned? So obviously, you know, just transition, as we've all said, is absolutely key. I think, you know, one of the things that we did in SSE was that we've had a programme and we've actively enabled people that have come from high carbon intensive industries to actually transition their skills to the lower carbon technologies. And about 20% of the SSE workforce that we surveyed had actually made the active choice to switch from the high carbon to the low carbon industry. Point number 2 around bringing businesses with us. So there was sort of like a theme in some of the questions around, you know, how can we make sure that everyone comes with us on this journey? And it was said before in the panel that I do think that there is an obligation on larger organisations. And one of the things that we've done is that we've said to a larger organisation that you can pass on your green tariff rate, because it's, you know, green contracted tariff rate, to your supply chain to actually try and help level up the playing field for SMEs. And I think third and finally, I'd like to call out that, you know, as we move on this green, sort of on this transition and towards net zero, that there is an opportunity for companies to be thinking about the broader community. So the example I would give is that we've worked with some data centres, and as we know, that they create lots of heat. So we've worked in terms of installing a heat network where essentially we can capture that heat, and they've been able to redistribute it to a hospital that was next to their sort of offices and a school. So just thinking really, you know, whole system thinking in terms of the overall infrastructure, where you're creating the heat, where you're losing the energy, how you can capture it and re-divert it, is another way to actually make sure that you're bringing a levelling up in terms of the transition.
Thank you. Dave?
I know you want to move on, Bill, probably, but
no, carry on.
Yeah, so what are polling telling? Polling tells us that people want to be green, people care about their children and grandchildren, they want the climate issue solved. But as we move into the next phase of transition, it's going to be more difficult than what we've done before. You know, so we need people to come with us. And I think that means this fairness and distribution point is absolutely crucial. You know, we've got to get it right. And this is where government needs to step up. We've got a mixed track record in the UK of not abandoning communities to their fate. You know, when we've seen it with shipbuilding and railways, and we've seen it with steel making and coal mining, we've not got a great track record, and people have got long memories of how they were left to it. The market will not solve this issue on its own, and government must design policy to think about fairness much better, in my opinion, than it's been doing. Second point, I think, is, yeah, as you'd rightly said, there will be certain sectors that either won't exist or won't exist in their current form, and they need to be helped. And I would extend that beyond oil and gas. I think there's transition and disruption coming in the farming and food sector as well. It just doesn't know it yet. And, you know, again, we've got to help farmers and others to make the transition to a low carbon future. And I don't think we're doing well enough. And these are the sort of things that I think. Final point I just want to make is this is also a global justice issue. The people who are not creating the climate problem are the ones who are already facing the worst effects. If you think climate change is a distant problem, you need to visit Africa. You need to talk to some of those economies that are already 5 to 10% smaller than they would have been, not because they've emitted much carbon, but because we've emitted a lot of carbon. And you're already seeing famines in Africa caused by climate change right now. And so the next round of talks in Egypt, so we talked about COP26 in Glasgow, the next round of talks in Egypt must begin to deal with this point about loss and damage and what the North is going to do in order to support the South. Because again, this transition is not going to happen even if we do everything that we're planning today in Edinburgh. It's not going to happen unless India and China and other places also do their bit. And they need some help as well. So I think whoever asked the question about distribution of costs and benefits and fairness, to me, that's almost, it's not quite the number one issue, but it's right up there. If we can't get that bit right, then we're doing something wrong as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think the next question that's sort of caught my eye is this, I suppose, yeah, is about a corporate one and linked to corporate targets. So maybe one for Nikki to take in the first instance, but no doubt Dave also this university will have a view on this, and it's the question is, it's wonderful to see targets for net zeros at a company level. However, it feels like on a private level, they generate a lot of flying, traveling, and CO2. How can the cooperations required mean net zero behavior, and can being more local solve this? So I think that's a question about, how do we actually ensure we have the collaboration that's needed? And we saw at COP26 the importance of the face-to-face element in terms of thrashing out a deal, however imperfect you think it was. We saw that live and before our eyes, and that wouldn't have happened had it been on Zoom or by phone. So, but how do we justify that and the traveling, and how do we encourage good corporate behavior? So maybe Nikki, do you want to?
Sure. I mean, this is most definitely about adjusting how we do things. So for sure, whoever asked the question, I completely agree. Equally, as Bill's just said, some of these challenges are pretty tough. And we know that there is a need for people to physically get together and actually debate some of these tough challenges. So I'm not imagining that we're going to be able to eradicate that completely, but I think that it's great actually where we are with digital applications and digital tools. So all of us will know, obviously through the very unfortunate circumstance of COVID, how every company, across the land in terms of office-based company is actually taken to doing Teams and Zoom calls like we're doing today. And we are seeing that, the effectiveness and the efficiency of organisations, from what I'm hearing, has not been negatively impacted. In fact, it's actually enabled more inclusion and more diversity in many cases. And obviously now we're moving towards more of a hybrid option. Equally, even when we think about really technical stuff, there's some amazing digital moves in terms of building out generation. So just as one example, artificial intelligence and actually having something called digital twins, which is where you've got your physical asset and then you have your asset digitally. So you can actually create all sorts of different scenarios. And then you can share that. You can share that with anybody, worldwide. And obviously, this is a worldwide challenge that we're dealing with. So what I was saying earlier on in terms of, how we can make sure that we're collaborating globally, it doesn't all have to be people jumping on planes. And I think that for me anyway, and the organisations that I'm speaking to, and certainly SSE, we are very conscious in terms of, do you need to travel? If you absolutely need to travel, then okay, there is a case, but it shouldn't be the default. And I would just tell you one thing. I was very impressed. I went to a relatively small agency yesterday to talk to them about whether they could help us. And I was already in London. And the account manager said to me, you can actually trade. So if you want us to come to your offices like some clients do, then obviously we will charge you. But if you are happy to do it all remotely, we will give you 3 hours back. And it's that sort of, very practical application at all levels of business, of people just thinking we don't need to be physically together for everything, that is actually going to make quite significant strides.
Thanks, Nikki. And my apologies. I'm just having to do a little bit of IT here because I managed to come without a power cable for my laptop and I just realized it's about to collapse on me. So Dave, do you want to jump in on that question? And I'll just I'll find a plug socket. Excuse me for a moment.
Absolutely. No, Nikki, I'd agree with everything Nikki's just said. We've introduced a sustainable travel policy at the university, and we talk about climate conscious travel. So we say to people that, if you have to travel, then so be it. We want to make sure that you're thinking about climate change before you do that. We've introduced a presumption against UK flights, which is a big deal for us actually. So a lot of people are now taking the train that otherwise would have been flying around the UK. I would say though that we think that travel is a good thing. Generally the world probably needs more interaction, not less, and not everything, as Nikki was saying, can be done virtually. So we have people who go and study climate change in the polar regions, and it's pretty difficult to get to all those places by ship. We also have people who fly to Africa so they can study sleeping sickness and reduce the mortality from sleeping sickness by 90%. So again, I would argue there's a balance here where, you have to thoughtfully consider what is the best mix. I would also say just 2 other quick points on this. One is that, there is some hope that over time, not yet, but I'm certain that we'll see zero carbon planes. It's just a question of how long. We've got zero carbon cars now, and that's taken a pretty long time. It's probably taken 3 decades or more to get here. And one of the reasons it took a very long time is because most of the original electric vehicle startups were really small, and they were fought tooth and nail by the incumbents who weren't interested at all and did their best to kill them off. What I think is different about aviation now is that the big players are involved. So Boeing and the rest of them are now investing billions of pounds right now. So there is some hope that we're going to see zero carbon planes faster than you might think. Final point for me is, and this is not directly related to the question, not all moving goods around is high carbon. So shipping is a pretty efficient way of moving things around the world. And I can show you off to the side, if you sometimes hear, oh, say these vegans, they're flying in avocados from all parts, bringing avocados and nuts from all parts of the world, and it's so carbon intensive. Well, actually, it's not. You can pretty easily show for the food system that you can move food far distances around the world and still have pretty low carbon impacts, because actually it's how you make the food and what food choices you make where your carbon is. It's not actually the amount of travel. So it's quite a complex question. And I always say to people, the assumption that travel is a bad thing in and of itself isn't always justified by the evidence and isn't always justified by the circumstance. So at the same time, we just don't like people hopping in a plane to China for, because they quite fancy it. So I think it's quite a nuanced one, and I just wanted to add that element as well. And I don't know if in the meantime Bill is back, or Hannah.
I am back.
Oh,
Thank you.
I was just going to say, it's for me about reducing it where you can. So when I was working with Baillie Gifford, when we were talking to them about all of their net zero plans, they were talking about how they were going to reduce their carbon emissions, and instead of people traveling loads of times a year to Canada, they were going to do 2 trips a year and fill it with all of their meetings on those 2 trips. We're thinking about how we can deliver our worldwide work. Can we start sending just a few people out instead of huge teams of people, and can we train locally and do things like that? So I think it's not, I absolutely agree. Nothing is, I love seeing people in the flesh. Like this last 2 years has been hideous for me, but actually I think, there is a lot of work that can be done still on Zoom, but nothing will ever replace seeing people in person. But if that can be reduced in some way, then, that if everyone tried to reduce it as much as possible, I think that would be great. I know people who are working in large firms who are flying down for the day to London. It's really difficult if you're going down for some meetings, but often you can do much more work on the train. Yeah, that was all.
Thank you. So I'm just conscious of time.
Can I just make a plug in there for so Edinburgh's Climate Compact, which was developed by the Edinburgh Climate Commission, has, in signing up to that, it has a section which is about travel. And I think it's about mindfulness in your decision making. So, it is about your business model as we're hybrid, what that's going to take. It's about your parking facilities and what facilitates what type of decisions by people traveling to your workplace, as much as traveling for work. And it's about the incentives and policies you have. Like Dave, the council has a policy which has a presumption against travel unless a case is made. And the case can be made. It's not an absolute bad. There are reasons why you would do it, but you have to be mindful in it. And annually we report on what that looks like. And if we think we are not complying with our direction of travel to be net zero because of the choices we're making, we can challenge them. So I think it's that transparency, mindfulness, and just creating a virtual circle of thinking about these things.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And that all comes down to just, individual decisions and individual circumstances that we have to, as you say, be mindful of. So I'm conscious of time. We just got a few minutes left. There are a whole host of questions that we could get into. None of them are a particularly short answer. And as you can tell from the discussion already, there are lots of views and inputs. It's just with apologies to those people who have put in some very thoughtful and searching questions. We're just not going to be able to get through them all in the time that we have. But maybe just to round us off, I'd like if each of the panel could maybe tell us what it is about the sort of energy transition and net zero innovation that most excites them, and either from a personal adoption point of view or that will give us the most benefit in the future. So if I can just maybe, Nikki, do you want to kick off and we'll just...
Sure. Well, look, from a personal point of view, let me answer it in that way. I think this is an amazing opportunity for us collectively, so collectively, globally, collectively across generations, to bring real diversity of thought to solving these challenges. Very rarely is there an opportunity to really make sure that we're bringing, different thinking processes to a challenge, because it's going to take all of us to really solve this. So whilst that's daunting, it's equally exciting, and I think quite sort of liberating in terms of a new way of thinking about planet Earth.
Thank you. Hannah, do you...
Yes, I'm thinking about the fact that Scotland is a small country. It can really be a centre for innovation, and I'm really excited to see a lot of these ideas and innovations that are coming out being trialled in different places and then being held up as, under a spotlight as, these innovations that have come out of Scotland. We could be a place for another enlightenment. So yeah, really excited about how Scotland can play a part in all of this.
Thank you. Dave?
So I'm a big fan of Tom Waits, and the singer, and he has a line about you can drive out nature with a pitchfork, but it always comes roaring back. I'm looking forward to us no longer treating nature at the end of a pitchfork and trying to work with it. That's the exciting thing for me. And to be slightly controversial, my specific example is we haven't talked about biodiversity and nature loss. It's a twin crisis along with climate. I'll say what I said earlier. I see huge disruption coming in the farming and food system. 1 in 1,000-year changes coming in my mind over the next 20 years because of plant-based meat and clean meat. Now that's going to have a real impact for our farmers, but the exciting thing for me is we've not left enough space for nature. And as we move to a system which is zero carbon, and we'll be relying, in my mind, for more on plant-based and clean meat made in a laboratory, we will free up huge amounts of land to consider how we can use that for our own well-being and for nature. So I think that the low carbon crisis will trigger all kinds of innovation and long-term assumptions that we've had about all kinds of things. Treating nature at the end of a pitchfork, I can see us having opportunities to think about that as well. So that's what excites me.
Thank you. And Paula, maybe just to round us off, I think it's appropriate from the cities or indeed your personal perspective, just to round us off.
I think for me personally, I think there's no more worthy way to spend your time than trying to positively contribute to this challenge. So I think for me, the sense of purpose that climate action gives, to deliver that better future for Edinburgh and see the impact of it on the future generations, to know that you're working to protect the future for our children, there's no greater motivator actually. And the fact that that's coupled with the need for huge creativity, energy and positivity, it's hard, it's difficult, it's big stuff, but it's the best stuff we could be doing. And, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Well, I think while I could say some other words, I don't think there is actually a better way of summing up the session and the task ahead of us than what you've just said. So with that, I'll just thank our panelists for all the contributions. I thank the audience for attending and for the host of questions that were fired at us. We've done our best to answer as many of them as we could, and hopefully given people some food for thought as well. So I think with that, I'll draw the session to a close and